Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to Lesson 7.1.1 on writing in 4 parts. So, Units 1 through 5 were equivalent to spelling and vocab in a language class. You have to learn the letters of the alphabet, you have to learn how to read the musical notes, and you have to learn how to spell various things, key signatures, intervals, triad, seventh chords. Last unit, Unit 6, we were looking at writing good melodies with counterpoint. And now we're going to focus more on the vertical aspect, the harmony of music. And specifically, Unit 7 is going to be looking at diatonic harmony, where the chords basically stay within a single key. This will allow us to write our own harmonic progressions that make sense, etc., etc., etc. So, as you saw with Composition Project 3, when you write for instruments, things start to get complicated very quickly with knowing ranges and transpositions and specific tonal characteristics and all of that. So the primary vehicle for learning how to deal with diatonic harmony and harmonic progressions is going to be writing for voices, and specifically a 4-part choir, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. So that's why we are looking at writing in 4 parts. So a lot of this that we're going to talk about this unit comes from the principles of counterpoint, where it should sound good and be easy to sing and be relatively independent. Those 3 points of counterpoint still operate even though we're now writing in 4 parts instead of 2. So, as I mentioned, we have 4 parts: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass from top to bottom. Soprano and alto are both written in the treble clef. Tenor and bass are both written in the bass clef, and that's put together into a grand staff. When you're writing soprano and tenor, the stems go up. When you're writing alto and bass, the stems go down, no matter where they are on the staff. So, like, normally here, this would be a stems up note, because it's below the middle line, but it's alto, so it has to be stems down. That's non-negotiable. And when you have this is a bit of an exception because it doesn't come up that often, but if you have 2 whole notes that are the same, they would go right next to each other the same way that you would write a unison, because that is in fact a unison. So that's what's going on here. And again, in terms of being easy to sing, because we're writing for human voices, you want to try to stay in comfortable singing ranges. So a good rule of thumb is C to G, G to C, C to G, G to C. And I've included, if you really need to, you can go up to a D with alto, and that will still be fine. If you really need to, you can go up to a D with bass and go down to an E with bass, too. But as a good general rule of thumb, the default should be C to G, G to C, and if a line, I really need that deep, okay, that's fine. We'll be fine. In terms of spacing, the voicing of a chord, even beyond what inversion it's in, makes a big difference. So, like, you could have, there's a C major chord, everything is allowed in terms of the ranges of the parts. Here's another C major chord. They sound quite different in terms of their characteristics, even though they're the same chord. So that's what we're talking about here. You may not have more than an octave between soprano and alto, or between alto and tenor. If you have more than an octave between those voices, things start to sound like weird and open. Like you could have something like this. And suddenly the soprano sounds like a completely separate thing from the rest of the texture. You want everything to kind of blend a little bit better. However, you are allowed to have more than an octave between tenor and bass. That's allowed because the bass line tends to be a little bit more independent, and as long as the upper 3 voices are pretty close together, then they'll still make sense. You must keep your voices in order, so soprano must always be above alto, must always be above tenor, must always be above bass. You can't switch the voices, because at that point, you're breaking the law of laziness. Someone is jumping more than they need to, because why would you do that? To be clear, there are reasons why you would do that in specific choral writing, but for the purposes of what we're doing right now, no, you would not do that. So when you are voicing, when you are spacing out your chord tones, there are 2 possibilities. You can be in close position, where the upper 3 voices are as close as possible. So C, E, G, or E, G, C. Notice that there is space between the tenor and the bass voice, and that's always okay. Open position means that there's some skipped chord tone between the upper voices. So C to G to E. Yeah. So you've skipped the E in there, you skipped the C in there, so that means it's open. Even if only one of those skipped a chord tone, that would still be open. So these are all examples of good spacing. Over here we have examples of bad spacing. Here, between the E and the G, you have a tenth. That's more than an octave. Nope. Here you have a C and an E. That's also a tenth. Nope, that's more than an octave. Too wide. Here, you have crossed voices, and this is the place where it will most commonly happen, where the alto is lower than the tenor, and it's harder to tell because they're on different staves. So this is a C4, this is middle C, and this is an E4, the E above middle C. So that's a problem. You would want to switch those so that this is C4 and this is E4. And here, you've just written notes that are out of range. The tenor is fine, that's a G. The alto is too high, and the soprano is definitely too high. So these are the sorts of things you want to be thinking about when you're writing in 4 parts. You also want to keep the parts independent, just like counterpoint. So like we said earlier, keep your voices in order, no voice crossings. Voice crossing here would be A going down to the D, whereas the E goes up to the F. So the alto again ends up below the tenor. You could fix this by saying, hey, the A is going to go to the F. I'm sorry, that should be stems down, because it is an alto voice. And then the E could go down to the D, and then suddenly everyone is happy. You also want to be aware of overlapping, which is the same thing as voice crossing between adjacent chords. So here, all the voices are in order, and all the voices are in order again, but the alto is below where the tenor just was, and that makes it sound like the tenors went from E down to D, when they didn't. They actually jumped all the way down there a seventh, which is not great in and of itself. So that's something you want to be aware of. The couple more things to talk about. You can have 2 adjacent voice parts on the same note. That's fine. If it has a stem, you can have it go both ways. And then, this is kind of obvious, but a lot of the time we're going to be writing triads, which have 3 notes, but we have 4 voice parts, so one of them has to appear twice. And we'll be talking about this more when we get to specific chords, but here are some general guidelines. You never want to double a note that has an accidental or is a tendency tone, because these are notes that have to be resolved in a specific way. Like in a 5/7 chord, sev goes to 1. And if you have 2 sevs, then both of those sevs will have to go to 1. And then you have parallel octaves. And it's like, no, we don't want that. In root position, the default is to double the root, because that's the root is the most important note. But you can double any note depending on what is going on in context. In first inversion, there's no specific recommendation. Whatever floats your boat. Doubling the soprano or the bass is most common, but, whatever. If you want to have 2 of the same middle voice, if that makes your voice leading easier to adjacent chords, great, go for it. Second inversion, you always want to double the bass. Second inversion triads have specific uses and appear in specific ways that will make more sense when we get to them. And then diminished triads are pretty much always in first inversion. You're going to want to double the bass voice, which is also the third of the chord. This goes back to the first one, where the root and the fifth of the diminished triad need to resolve in specific ways. As the B likes to go to, or sev likes to go to 1, and 4 likes to go to 3. So, I don't expect you to remember this right now, just putting it in your head, and it will make more sense when we start writing harmonic progressions in 4 parts. So, this was a lot of talking. Again, this is kind of just an introduction. It'll make more sense as we get into things. Take care. See you next time.